Lieutenant Colonel Edward Ager currently serves with us here at the Department of Clinical Investigations as a Deputy Chief. He received his PhD in microbiology from Meharry Medical College and is certified as a microbiologist by the American Board of Medical Microbiology. He has a broad scope of both clinical and research experience in the military systems. Please welcome Lieutenant Colonel Ager as he provides an overview of the Office of Human Research Protection here at BAMC.
Lieutenant Colonel Edward Ager. I am the Deputy Chief of DCI. My topic today will be human subjects research and human research subjects protection. Hopefully this talk will shed light on why there is all those steps in the IRB process. So this next slide is my disclaimer. And this is my objective slide. So there'll be a brief introduction. I'm going to talk about some examples of research that has led to policies and changes in policies. And I'm going to talk a little bit about humans research protections. So with that, let's start. So what defines human subjects research? Human subjects research is termed a systematic scientific investigation that may be either interventional or observational and uses human beings as the research subjects. The research may be either clinical research or non-clinical, such as behavioral studies, and involves both the collection and analysis of data in order to answer a specific question. In clinical trials, drugs, vaccines, and medical devices are evaluated in a specific and especially heavily regulated study process. The ethical guidelines that govern the use of human subjects in research are actually a fairly new concept. Regulatory bodies like the Food and Drug Administration and Institutional Review Boards, or IRBs, were preceded by the Pure Food and Drug Act in 1906. Human subjects protection has actually evolved with efforts to understand ethics in research over the course of several hundred years. The path to today's human subjects protections regulations and ethical considerations has been a very long road and very checkered. The current system, which has evolved over time, seeks to minimize the risks of unethical behavior and serious adverse events. But this current system is not infallible. Continuous re-evaluation of these regulations is imperative in order to systematically improve the safety of subjects who are willing to participate in research activities. There have been many significant studies which have contributed to the evolution of research ethics that we see today. Many of these landmark studies demonstrate the very complexity of the issues which surround the protection of human subjects in research. Institutional review boards have the federally mandated responsibility of reviewing research involving human subjects. These IRBs are often have other names such as Independent Ethics Committee, Ethics Review Boards, or Research Ethics Boards. Their purpose is the same, to ensure that a proposed protocol meets all of the appropriate ethical guidelines before subjects may be enrolled in a given study. The IRB has the authority to approve, require modifications, or even disapprove research. So throughout history, there have been many scandals associated with human subjects research. Many major highly debated ones, including infectious disease studies in human subjects have been followed by the enacting of stricter regulatory rules. These studies are very diverse, and they include behavioral studies as well as biomedical research. Some of the research studies that I'm alluding to are listed here. Many of them you may have heard about, but there may be a few you haven't. So one of the studies that I want to talk about as an example is this study that I found here called the Lubeck disaster and the subsequent Reich circular. So between 10 December 1929 and the 30th of April 1930, there were 251 of 412 infants born in Lubeck, Germany, received 3 doses of BCG, or Bacillus calmette-guerin vaccine, by mouth during the first 10 days of life. 72 of these infants died of tuberculosis before the end of their first year. 135 suffered from clinical tuberculosis but eventually recovered, and another 44 became tuberculin positive but actually remained well. The PI, Calmette, was able to establish the BCG vaccine as a non-experimental prophylactic treatment against tuberculosis. The BCG vaccine was actually in experimental stages when Calmette convinced the court that this vaccine was a post-experimental routine medical treatment. By taking this shortcut, Calmette did not have to inform the children's parents about the risks involved in taking the vaccine. Following this, Dr. Julius Moses, who was a critic of unethical human experimentation, drafted new guidelines for human subjects research. After debate in the German parliament and in the press, the guidelines were published and actually became legal and official in 1931. These rules for research in human subjects were issued as the Reich Circular of 1931, and these guidelines were recognized and discussed the need to protect human subjects. It also recognized the responsibility of the physician who was in charge of the study. Fast forward 16 years to the Nuremberg trials. After the defeat of the Nazis after the Second World War, the first international war crimes trials took place in Berlin, Germany. The court was subsequently moved on to Nuremberg in Bavaria, and the trial continued through August of 1946. Over the course of the next 9 months, the International Military Tribunal indicted 24 high-ranking military, political, and industrial leaders of the Third Reich. 24 were charged with war crimes, crimes against peace, crimes against humanity, and conspiracy to commit these crimes. The defendants at the trials included Admiral Karl Dönitz, Minister of the Interior Wilhelm Frick, Field Marshal William Keitel, and the Governor General of occupied Poland, Hans Frank. 12 were sentenced to death, 3 were acquitted, and the rest received sentences ranging from 10 years to life in prison. Following this, the United States conducted 12 additional trials of representative Nazis from various sectors, including law, finance, ministry, and manufacturing. The first of these subsequent trials was called the Doctors' Trial, and it involved 23 defendants. 20 were physicians accused of murder and torture in the conduct of medical experiments on concentration camp inmates. The Doctors' Trial began on December 9th of 1946 and ended in July of 1947. The judges at the Nuremberg trial recognized that more needed to be done to protect human subjects in the conducting of research. The judges articulated a sophisticated set of 10 research principles. These were centered not on the physician, but on the research subject. The Nuremberg Code has not officially been adopted in its entirety as law by any one nation or as ethics by any major medical association. However, it is very important consideration in laws that have been and regulations that have been enacted since then. One of these examples is informed consent. This part of the Nuremberg Code has been universally accepted. The next study I want to highlight is the Tuskegee syphilis experiments. The syphilis study was a 40-year-long study in which researchers observed the natural progression of syphilis in 600 study subjects, including 399 African American men with syphilis. The participants were primarily sharecroppers, and many had never visited a doctor. Despite medical advancements and the discovery of successful penicillin treatments for syphilis, researchers involved in the Tuskegee syphilis study took extreme measures to ensure that participants remained unaware of treatment options. Doctors from the U.S. Public Health Service informed the participants, 399 men with syphilis and a control group of 201 others, that they were just being treated for bad blood. The Tuskegee syphilis study resulted in public uproar and legislative action to ensure the protection of human rights. Again, the men were monitored by healthcare workers, but were only given placebos and mineral substance. To persuade participants even further, researchers provided them with regular meals, free transportation to and from the clinics, and funeral stipends for the families. Research directors hired African American doctors and nurses in order to maintain the participants' trust throughout the course of the study. Note again, penicillin had been a recommended treatment for syphilis since 1947. Peter Buxton, who was a public health service venereal disease investigator, found out about the Tuskegee study in the mid-1960s, and in response, the public health service officials formed a committee to review the study, and they ultimately opted to continue it until all the participants had died and the data could be analyzed. The unethical practices committed by researchers here at the Tuskegee Institute led to the 1974 National Research Act, which mandated the use of institutional review boards for research that receives federal grants. And here is Dr. Buxton in one of his many speeches to an audience discussing his role in exposing the Tuskegee study. Many may not know that the syphilis study actually went beyond Tuskegee and was conducted in Guatemala. And here, 5,500 people were enrolled between 1946 and 1948. There have been many documentaries on this study, including this one on CNN, which is available to watch on YouTube. The legacy of the Tuskegee experiments was very broad, and as you can see, resulted in many publications, which are cornerstones in medical ethics discussions. Another study that I wanted to talk about here as part of this talk was this study, which is called the Havasu Indian DNA study, and it was conducted at Arizona State University between 1990 and 2003. In this study, the objective was to provide genetic clues to the tribe's devastating rate of diabetes. In trying to solve this problem, members of the Havasu Indian tribe had given DNA samples to university researchers beginning in 1990. Allegedly, the collected blood samples were used then to study many other things, including mental illness. A complaint was filed, the case of Havasupai tribe versus the Arizona Board of Regents. In this complaint, 6 charges were brought forward, including lack of informed consent, violation of civil rights, and intentional or negligent infliction of emotional distress. At the conclusion of this hearing, the Arizona State University Board of Regents agreed to pay $700,000 to 41 of the tribe's members and then return the blood samples. This study highlights the new, very contemporary discussion about how DNA is used in research. And off to the right of this picture is taken from a play which actually took place in New York, Rochester, New York, and it's called Informed Consent by Deborah Zoe Laufer. And in this play, they actually discuss the ethics surrounding the Havasupai Indian case. So ethically, the outcome of this study is considered to be quite significant because it implied that the rights of research subjects can be violated when they are not fully informed about how their DNA might be used. This case highlights issues involving broad consent, and one statement made is that the case shows that the PIs did not provide sufficient information to enable meaningful consent. The Havasupai settlement may actually be one of the first in which payment was made to individuals who said their DNA was misused. So at this point, I want to pause and just pay some attention to the fact that out of many of these trigger events, there have been ethical reforms. So the Nuremberg Code, the Protection of Human Subjects for Biomedical and Behavioral Research Act of 1974, the Belmont Report, which I haven't talked about yet, and the Final Common Rule of 2017, which actually was based on the Common Rule, which preceded it. So I just want to discuss here the Belmont Report. This is a cornerstone of ethics discussions and ethical principles in human research. It was published in 1979 in response to unethical studies in psychology and medicine, and the principles of the Belmont Report govern all research supported by the US government. Ethical principles outlined in the report are the basis for subsequent regulations designed to ensure protection of human subjects in research. The basic principles of the Belmont Report are, of course, respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. So for respect of persons, PIs are expected to treat individuals as autonomous, do not use people as a means to an end, allow people to choose for themselves, provide extra protection for those with diminished autonomy, such as prisoners, children, military, and cognitively impaired. There are 2 rules that encompass the principle of beneficence. First, do no harm, and second, maximize possible benefits and minimize risks. And then for justice, treat people fairly, and there should be fair sharing of burdens and benefits of the research. An injustice occurs when benefits a person may be entitled to are denied without good reason, or if burdens are imposed unduly during research. So the common rule is a set of regulations which were then developed to ensure compliance with the Belmont Report. And the common rule is set out in 45 CFR Part 46, Subpart A. The regulations fall under the Department of Health and Human Services. These regulations have further been adopted by many other federal departments which regulate human research. So the outcome of all these are human subjects research protection mechanisms. Amongst those are institutional assurances of compliance, review of research by an IRB, and informed consent of the subjects. All research projects are categorized into one of three categories for the IRB review process. Each category is different in the level of scrutiny and submission procedures. The IRB is responsible for making the final decision of which category a research project will fall under. It may be full, expedited, or even exempt. So as I said earlier, the IRB has the authority to approve, require modifications, table, or even completely disapprove a research activity, including research activities that have been previously approved. So one other part of that needs to be considered is the consent form. And the consent form needs to have required elements. For example, the information in the consent form must include research procedure, purpose, risk, benefits, alternatives, and contact information. The consent form must compensate for comprehension, intelligence, rationality, maturity, language, and the presentation of the information must be adapted to fit the subject's educational or their cognitive capacity. And then voluntariness. The consent form absolutely requires conditions free of coercion and undue influence. There are consent form requires various elements, and amongst these are a statement that clearly describes the study as research. The research must be completely and well described. There must be a full description of the risks involved in the research. There should be a description of the benefits of participating in the research study. There should be a full disclosure of all treatment alternatives, and the study must maintain confidentiality. If the study is more than minimal risk, compensation and/or medical treatment must be described in the research consent form. The participation must be voluntary, and there needs to be a clear statement of who to contact if the subjects have any questions. Okay, so that's my talk today. I've included my email address down below. If you have any questions, you may also contact me using the DCI webpage. And thank you very much.